What to consider when navigating a new software project. Recently, we have talked about two very important things, in my opinion, for making a software project successful. Number one was to actually make sure that you're building the right thing. And number two was to be aware of all the trade-offs that need to be done and the priorities. Today, I want to give you part 3 of the most important things from my experience to make a software project actually work. And in a nutshell, it is to always know where you're coming from and where your starting position is. Now again, I'm going to illustrate it and make it a bit more understandable by using a simple example from the real life. So let's imagine you're on a hiking trip with a friend. You both have a great time exploring nature and enjoying the landscape around you. However, the region is quite unfamiliar to you. You're on vacation, and therefore you need to check from time to time that you're on the right track. If you don't do that, it might get dark before you return from your little hike, and then it might get complicated to find your way back to your rental apartment. So let's assume you have no GPS signal. Maybe your smartphone battery is empty. How would you navigate your way back in this situation? At least you have a map in your bag that you picked up at a tourist shop, and you unfold the map and you identify your destination immediately. You can see on the map that is where I want to go. And then you realize that this is only one part of the equation. You also need to know where your current position is. How would you find out? Well, in this case, you have several options. You could look around you to identify some hints about your current position. Maybe it's a street name, maybe it's a monument or some other site. You could also ask a passenger walking by if he or she knows the region and what your current location is. Or maybe there are hiking maps located at some intervals on the side of the hiking trail where you can find a marker for your current position. However, maybe none of these options works at the moment, then you might even need to walk a bit further for a while until you come across one of these options to find your current position. Now, how does all that relate to software development and IT projects in general, you may ask? The answer is quite simple. Whenever you want to reach a certain goal, you need to know your current position. So, when you join a new software project, there is usually some existing software that needs to be extended or improved, or maybe some bugs need to be fixed. It's rare that you're actually starting out on a complete empty greenfield, but even when you are working on a greenfield project, there's typically some existing process or other software that needs to be integrated or otherwise accounted for. So in other words, the existing IT landscape plus some established work processes are the starting point of your project. Now you might say that sounds all reasonable, but it's quite abstract. So let's apply this concept to some specific actions that you can take to avoid running into this trap in your projects. Number one is find out how current processes work. You can talk to business experts and people working on the daily business. Maybe someone can show you their daily work while you're looking over their shoulder. You're basically watching them, asking questions from time to time. Another thing to consider is examine the existing software that shall be extended or improved. Maybe it's also intended to be integrated in some other software, or it needs to be replaced. Yes, even when you replace some legacy software, you should look at the existing solution. Read important code sections and ask questions if you have access to the original developers. Often they won't be available, maybe they have already switched projects or companies, that's okay, but do your best. Another thing to do is to check for available documentation about existing processes and software. Read it carefully and consider asking questions based on the documentation. Now, often you will find that documentation is either missing or outdated. Then you should strongly consider to update it yourself or create it in the first place when you gain some knowledge on the topic. This will A, deepen your own understanding of the topic that you're writing about, and B, you're doing future engineers a big favor, because the people coming after you, maintaining or extending the system, they will be in a better position than you, because you took the time and effort to actually write some helpful documentation. And number 4, lastly, I would strongly consider to read test cases for existing software. Documentation is often missing or outdated, and in this case, tests can be a more reliable alternative that tells you about the desired behavior of the system. Of course, test coverage is not always great, but today you can usually expect some form of existing tests, and from them you can derive what the software is actually intended to do and how it should behave. So bottom line here is always know where you're coming from before you head off towards your goal. You need to know what the starting point is in addition to your target, to your goal. Otherwise you will run into a direction that leads you either nowhere, that would be a best case scenario, or in a worst case scenario, it could do harm to the company that you're working for because you're wasting resources. You might be creating more work and other problematic things when you don't know what the actual starting point is. So that was it. What has been your experience with finding out where you're coming from in a project? Tell me in the comments.